As night falls, the footsteps of the past begin to echo. This is not just the story of an ordinary night. It is a whisper from the shadows of empires, from stone walls forgotten by time. Close your eyes and imagine the calendar shows 753 BC. On the slopes of Palatine Hill, overlooking the waters of the Tiber River, a young city is founded. That city is Rome. According to legend, twin brothers Romulus and Remus were suckled by a she-wolf. As they grew, they founded a city. But brotherhood was short-lived. Romulus killed Remus, and Rome was born. Even its founding was written in blood. This city would centuries later become a giant shaping world history. Rome. At first a kingdom, then a republic, and finally an empire. This transformation was filled with victories, betrayals, revolutions, and wars. In 509 BC, the kings were expelled and the republic was established. The Senate, the consuls, Rome was governed in the name of SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. But within the Republic, there was strife. The gap between the rich and the poor was widening. The people demanded justice. The Spartacus rebellion erupted during this time. Gladiators fought for freedom, but were defeated. Then, in the 1st century BC, 3 great men took the stage: Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Caesar, beloved by the people, leader of the armies, but a threat in the eyes of the senators. When he crossed the Rubicon River, the course of history changed. The Republic ended, and the Empire was born. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, but his death ignited a greater storm. And finally, Augustus arrived, the first emperor. He brought peace. Pax Romana began. Rome was now the master of the Mediterranean, from Egypt to Britain, from Spain to Syria. A vast empire stretched. It had roads, legions, laws, currency, art, theaters, and arenas. In the shadow of the Colosseum, gladiators fought as the crowd cheered. Rome had become a way of life. But every peak has a fall, every glory has a price. And Rome was slowly walking toward that end. This was the beginning of a collapse. But the collapse didn't come all at once. Slowly, quietly, from within. The story continues tonight as we quietly approach Rome's end. Now, close your eyes. Listen to the waters of the Tiber River, where Rome was born. Everything began. In the silence of the night, we slowly journey towards Rome's glorious era. Augustus, also known as Octavian, was a figure who left a lasting mark on Roman history. In 27 BC, the first emperor rose from the ashes of the Republic, bringing peace. Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasting nearly 2 centuries, was a time of reduced wars, flourishing trade, and rising art and culture. The story that began on the banks of the Tiber River spread across the Mediterranean. Roads were now the veins of the empire. Roman roads carried soldiers, traders, and messengers. Legions guarded the borders. Cities grew. Forums, temples, baths, this era of peace kept Rome at its golden age. Yet beneath this grandeur, power dynamics were constantly shifting. Augustus's successors were not as strong as he was. Some were cruel, others ruthless. Wherever there was a throne struggle, Rome's future was at risk. Emperors like Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius tried to keep the empire standing. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrestled with internal conflicts of civilization while threats grew from outside. Germanic tribes, Persians, Huns, Peace was fading at the empire's borders. Inside, economic troubles, taxes, and public discontent grew. These were signs that Pax Romana was slowly ending. But still, Rome was the strongest state in the world. It left legacies in art, architecture, and law. Forums and theaters were full, gladiator fights continued. The Colosseum still set the rhythm of hearts. But dark clouds were gathering, a silent decay was beginning in the heart of Rome. It was hard to feel it, perhaps, but history was about to reveal all its accumulated pains. Tonight, we will move toward the crises that ended Rome's golden age. Take a slow, deep breath. Rome's fate is not yet in our hands, but the storm is about to break. Now, we journey quietly into the heart of Rome. The 3rd century. The empire was leaving its glorious days behind. Yet beneath the shining splendor, a dark storm was rising. This period is known to history as the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors changed rapidly, each shedding blood for the throne, many ruling only for a few months. The Senate's power waned, while the army's influence grew. Military commanders fought for the throne, and the cities were in revolt. Moreover, economic crisis was looming. Taxes were heavy, currency was devalued, trade routes were unsafe, land became less productive. Barbarian tribes, especially the Goths and Franks, frequently pressured Rome's borders. The empire was in a constant state of war. But perhaps the greatest threat came from within. The empire was struggling to hold itself together. At the end of this turbulent era, Diocletian emerged. He implemented sweeping reforms to save Rome. Dividing the empire into east and west, he created a system of 4 rulers, the Tetrarchy. However, this division was a harbinger of Rome's eventual fragmentation. Diocletian's reforms stabilized the situation somewhat, but problems were far from solved. The 3rd century was in many ways a life and death struggle for Rome, and this struggle would shape the empire's future. Tonight, we listen to the silent story of these deep crises and upheavals carved into the pages of history. Take a deep breath. Rome's fate is still not sealed, but the storm is very near. Rome's mighty walls had withstood countless enemies through the ages, but every wall has a weak spot. By the 4th century, that weak spot was growing larger. From the depths of Europe to the north, tribes pressed against Rome's gates. Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, and Huns. To them, Rome was not just a city, but a gateway to dreams, wealth, and a new life. As these tribes pushed Rome's borders, internal political turmoil weakened Rome's resistance. In 376 AD, the Visigoths, fleeing the Huns, sought refuge on Roman soil, but this peace was short-lived. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked Rome. For the first time in centuries, the great city of Rome fell to an enemy. This was a turning point. The power Rome once thought eternal began to break. Footsteps echoed through the city, marking the last breaths of a civilization. Alaric led the sack, taking treasures, but failing to destroy the spirit of the city. This story is one of humanity, of resistance, collapse, and rebirth. Slowly close your eyes and imagine the moment a centuries-old empire fell. Rome was no longer just a name. It was a lesson in history. Take a deep breath to continue. Next, we will explore the formal division of the empire into East and West Rome, and the growing divergence between them. The flow of history sometimes splits, like a river, dividing into 2 branches. The Roman Empire was divided into 2 great parts in this flow. In 395 AD, after the death of Emperor Theodosius, the empire was officially split, Western Rome and Eastern Rome. This division was initially meant to make governance easier, but over time, this separation became a chasm that shaped the empire's fate. Western Rome took Rome City as its capital, but it began to weaken economically. Eastern Rome made Constantinople its capital, where wealth and power concentrated. Eastern Rome would become known as Byzantium and would survive for many centuries. But the days of Western Rome were numbered. Barbarian invasions, administrative difficulties, and economic collapse hastened the West's end. Between these two worlds, different cultures and administrations developed. The East flourished with Hellenistic and Christian influences, while the West took its last breaths of old Roman values. Tonight, we will experience the pains and consequences of this division. Take a deep breath, because Rome's fall story quickly continues after this separation. The city once thought unshakable was taken by the enemy, and the world fell silent. In 410 AD, Alaric, leader of the Visigoths, stood at Rome's gates. The city walls were old. Defenses were weakened. The people waited in fear. When Alaric's army entered, not only stones but hopes were shattered. This sack was a turning point for Rome. Historians see this event as the symbol of the Western Roman Empire's collapse. But it was not just an attack, it was the end of an era. Rome was no longer the mighty city it once was. The echoes in the streets were the last breaths of a great civilization. Alaric plundered the city, taking treasures, but he could not destroy its spirit. This story is one of humanity, resilience, downfall, and renewal. Slowly close your eyes and reflect. The moment a great empire fell. Tonight, we live this moment together. Take a deep breath, because the story is not over yet. For centuries, Rome had been one of the greatest empires in the world. But finally, it took its quiet last breath. The year was 476 A.D. A young man sat on the throne, Romulus Augustulus. His name was a nod to the legendary founder Romulus, but his fate was very different. Romulus Augustulus was only a child. The real power lay in the hands of Odoacer, a Germanic general. Odoacer set his sights on the Western Roman throne, and on September 4th, 476, he deposed Romulus and ended the empire. Historians regard this event as the official fall of the Western Roman Empire. But this was not just an end. It was also a new beginning. Odoacer established his own rule over Rome. The Eastern Roman Emperor officially recognized this change. Thus, Western Rome was drawn into the dusty shelves of history. Yet, Eastern Rome, known as Byzantium, survived. Rome's fall was not merely a shift of power, but a signal for Europe's long journey into the medieval darkness. Now, take a deep breath and imagine this historic moment. The final moments of an empire, the closing of an era. And listen to this whispered story of history as night falls. Behind every great collapse, there is not just one reason, but many complex causes. The end of the Roman Empire was no different. This giant, which had grown and strengthened for centuries, slowly melted away from within. Economic troubles, rising taxes, and currency devaluation shook the very foundations of Rome. Landowners had amassed large estates, while small farmers went bankrupt. This led to decreased productivity in rural areas At the same time, unemployment and poverty were rising in the cities. Social injustice weakened the fabric of society. Politically, constant changes of emperors, power struggles destabilized Rome. The army was occupied not only with external enemies, but also internal conflicts. Moreover, the rise of Christianity challenged Rome's traditional pagan culture. This religious and cultural transformation affected the unity of society. Pressure from barbarian tribes, increased invasions, made border defense difficult. When all these factors combined, the fall of Rome became inevitable. But remember, every end is the herald of a new beginning. Now, take a deep breath and drift to sleep feeling the intricate web behind Rome's great fall. Like every great empire, when Rome ended, it did not leave an empty void behind. Instead, it left a legacy that would illuminate humanity's path for millennia. In law, Rome laid the foundations of universal justice. Roman law was not just a legal system, but the groundwork for human rights and state governance. Even today, many countries' legal systems show the influence of Rome. In architecture and engineering, Rome's roads, bridges, and aqueducts remain marvels of human ingenuity. Monuments like the Colosseum stand as symbols of aesthetic and functional brilliance. Latin, Rome's language, formed the basis of modern European languages. Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian all trace their roots to Latin. Additionally, Rome's political system, with its republican ideals, inspired modern democracies. Christianity's rise within the empire ensured the faiths spread across the world. Rome's legacy was a guiding light for humanity even during the dark Middle Ages. And now, as you listen to this history, you become part of that legacy. By hearing the stories whispered between ancient stones, you begin to understand a vast chapter of human history. Take a deep breath and feel the weight of this heritage, because history is not just the past. It is part of today and tomorrow as well. Now, the quiet of the night has enveloped the entire city. The stones silently tell the countless stories they have witnessed over the centuries. Rome, once the heart of the world, the cradle of civilization, but like every story, it too had an end. Power, glory, victories, all slowly faded away. The fall was not an end, but a transformation. And this transformation opened doors to new civilizations and new worlds. Now, close your eyes and imagine walking slowly through Rome's ancient stone streets. With each step, history surrounds you. With each breath, you feel the spirit of civilization. What you thought was eternal was only a moment, lost in time. But that moment was life itself. Take a deep breath, and as you drift into sleep, feel the whispers of Rome. Because history will always be with you. Good night.